friends. Welcome to the Reasonable Truth podcast. This is your host, Prashanth Daniel. It is good to be back here again for another episode. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this show. This is one we have never done before. The topic that we're going to talk about today is something that we have not really covered in depth. And so I'm really excited to have my guest on for today, Anthony Elliot. Anthony Elliot is the president and founder for Reviving Hope Ministries, based here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he and I actually go to the same church, Believers Church right here. And so that's how I got to know him. I actually sat in on one of his, I believe it's a Wednesday night class, which was really, really good. And I thoroughly enjoyed myself. You know, my wife and I both attended it, and it was really great. And so I kind of made a mental note to myself at that point that I was going to have Anthony on the show. So, Anthony, I know it's been a few months, but welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, just appreciate the opportunity to get the more word out for what we do here.
Fantastic. Now, I do want to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. I think it's important for our audience to know this. We are going to be talking about therapy and counseling and all that, mental health, emotional health, all those things. But Anthony, I'm actually going to let you give the disclaimer yourself, so our listeners know they hear it directly from you and just not from me. So, what is it you want to tell our listeners today?
Okay, thanks for that opportunity. The mental health field has a lot of regulations that go along with it. So part of this disclaimer is to let folks know that I am not a licensed therapist. I don't have any formal degrees or formal scholastic training in this area. I do have lay training, and I am an ordained minister. So what I do would be considered pastoral in nature in the counseling and coaching type work that I do. What I really consider myself is a disciple maker, right? Because I want to help people be the best versions of themselves that they can be. And I personally believe that that's an image that's created from God in us. And through the brokenness of the world, through sin, through traumas, through hurts, through all the things that we experience, that image gets twisted and distorted and broken in a lot of ways. And so my vision of what real discipleship looks like is figuring out how to be who God created me to be. And so I have a big stack of tools. I have done 4 years of training to be a pastoral counselor, and like I said, I'm ordained to do that. So I think there is an overwhelming evidence of things that we can do to help folks. It's just pastoral in nature instead of professional. But again, that allows some freedoms that I have and get to enjoy that people that are more bound by the red tape of the health systems don't necessarily get to afford themselves of. So being able to bring in more of the faith conversations, to bring in more of the spirituality conversations, to invite God into these settings is really important for me. So, I mean, yes, I could go pursue licensure and do the schooling and all of those things, but I really like what I do here better. So that's why we do it that way. So anytime that we have these conversations, I just tell people these are talking about patterns, characteristic traits. Nothing that I do is, diagnostic or anything like that in nature.
Very good. No, that's a very good description, very good disclaimer too, by the way, Anthony. Thank you for that. And what I'm going to do is I'll put your ministry's link, your website link in the show notes so people can go and check it out. Anthony's got some great content, some great descriptions and everything on there. And definitely, and that'll also be able to give you a chance to get in touch with him directly as well if you want to reach out for any sort of help. And so I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you explained that well. And obviously, those are some of the things we're going to get into tonight. Sort of where is secular psychology? What does that look like compared to Christian counseling side by side? Are there overlaps? What are the good overlaps? What are the bad overlaps? Things like that. And we'll get into all of that. But Anthony, I want to start with something personal first. I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit of your life, just a little bit of your testimony, but also most importantly, what got you into this field? What made you decide that this is the calling that God has on your life?
Okay. I love telling my story, and I think story work is a very essential and important part of healing in our journey. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to do this, and if it's all right, I'll kind of share the deeper, the bigger story, since we have a little bit of time here to be able to
Please
do
do.
that. So my story begins on April the 23rd, 1970, which is my birth date. So I'm just about 8 weeks out from my 56th birthday. When I was born, I was second born of my parents. So I have a sister who's 6 years older than I am. But when I came along, my mom and dad were kind of already having some marital issues. My dad was in the Navy, so he was gone. My mom was still fairly young. And so, home life was tumultuous from what I understand. So they ended up getting divorced when I was about 3 years old. So I have very little memories of my biological father from those years. Um, my mom, started raising us as a single mom. Had a little few interactions with my bio dad in those years, but then my mom started dating again and decided to get remarried when I was about 6. And then at 8, my now stepdad decided he wanted to adopt me and my older sister. Now my older sister's 14 at this point, and I'm 8. Um, so she has a lot more connection with our bio dad than I did. But I remember the day of the adoption hearing, and again, this is 1978. There was no internet, there was no Zoom meetings. We had to all load up and go down to the courthouse to do this adoption process. And we weren't anticipating my bio dad to show up, but unbeknownst to us, he did. And so there was kind of this hustle and bustle, kind of getting us ready for the adoption, and they usher me and my sister into this side room of the courthouse. And as an 8-year-old, this room seemed enormous, but I'm sure it wasn't. But I remember my dad coming in the doors, the double doors at the far end of the room. He had gotten out of the Navy, but had gotten involved in some motorcycle gangs, drugs, alcohol. He
And
was
this
a
is
pretty
your
rough character back then.
this is
My
this is
bio
your bio
dad.
dad. Okay.
Yeah. Uh, so he comes into the courthouse dressed in his full biker leathers, had an earring, the whole 9 yards. And in 1978, I'd watched enough Perry Mason reruns to know that something's off here.
Right.
But he sits down across the table from us and he starts talking to us. And I only remember the very last question that he asked us. And he asked us if this was what we wanted. As I tell the story, we were well coached in all the correct answers to give to make sure that the process went forward. So we said, yes, it was. Not realizing, as I do today, the at best inappropriateness and at worst somewhat abusive nature of the question to put the weight of two entire family systems on the decision of an 8-year-old is something no 8-year-old should have to carry. But yet we did. And so I watched my bio dad get up and he walked out of the back of the room, and I figured that'd be the last I'd ever see of him. Now, the story kind of splits here, and so we'll take this tangent with my bio dad. some years later, my bio dad got saved and got clean and sober and has a wonderful testimony. And so I won't tell his story for him. But 32 years later, almost 34 years later, I was reunited with my bio dad at the age of 34. And we got reconnected and reestablished some relationship, and we have a good relationship today. So there was definitely a redeeming arc to that, although it took a long time for that to get there. And there were several bumps and bruises along the way with that, as you can imagine. But back right after the adoption, my mom and now adopted dad started having kids. So I have four younger siblings. The next youngest sibling is 9 years younger than me. So about every 2-3 years beyond that. So I got a sister that's 6 years older, me 9 years to the next sibling. But significantly, my second younger brother, Paul, was born with severe mental and physical handicaps. He had Down syndrome and a lot of other pretty significant physical ailments. Couple that with my older sisters graduating high school, getting married, moving out of the house. My adopted dad, his work, his profession he was a pilot by trade. And so he didn't just go to work 9 to 5 and was home in the evenings. When he went to work, he was gone for 3, 4, 5 days at a time, and then be home 2, 3, 4 days, and then he'd be gone on another trip. So it often fell to me as kind of the oldest son, the oldest child at home, to kind of move into this role as the surrogate parent. So I would either watch the other siblings while mom took care of Paul or took him to doctor's appointments or therapy appointments and all those things, or I'd watch him while she took care of the other kids and help do all the housework and keeping the house running as needed. Of course, that was just normal life to me. I had no sense that that was anything out of the ordinary. But what it did mean, and I began in kind of my early high school years to figure out that there was no time for after school programs and clubs and sports or any of those things because mom needed help at home. So I would go to school. As soon as school was over, I'd go home. And was praised a lot for those things, right? I got a lot of accolades for being this wonderful, dutiful, responsible kid. What I didn't realize is that I wasn't developing socially at all. And so there was a big section of my growth and development that was stunted in a lot of ways. And that didn't really come to play till I graduated school from high school and went off to college. And there had my first real dating relationship. And again, being socially inept and disconnected and not knowing how to do any of those things, you can imagine how unhealthy that was in all the ways, right? So
The dating world can be a rough world.
Yes, it will expose things for you very quickly.
Right.
And it did. Well, I say it did. I was not aware enough at that point to realize what it was exposing, but it was certainly exposing things. So that relationship kind of ended in, a very dramatic crash and burn kind of situation. And so I was on the rebound, and I had a friend that told me about this other girl that she knew that had just gotten out of her long-term relationship, and she was willing to connect us and hook us up and see how that went. And that's how I met Michelle, my future wife, is we were both kind of double rebounders, not realizing the complications that would come with that. So we dated for about a year and a half, and I proposed. And at that point, when I proposed, we decided, okay, we'd crossed a lot of boundaries. We were being very codependent. We were physically active, sexually active, all of those things. We thought, okay, we're both kind of professing Christians. Let's try to get back on track here. And so, from the engagement till the marriage, we decided to abstain from physicality, and that worked pretty well. We only slept once, but that one time created my firstborn daughter.
Mm.
So, about 3 or 4 weeks before our wedding, Michelle comes to me and says, "Hey, we need to have a talk." I said, "Sure, what's up?" She goes, "I'm pregnant." Oh, okay. Well, life has a way of getting your attention pretty quickly.
Right.
By this time, I was in my 4th year of college. I was going to the University of Oklahoma in Norman. I was actually in a 5-year degree program, so I still had another year of schooling to get through. I'm getting married. Now I have a baby on the way. I had no way to support my family, so I decided I would do the man thing and drop out of school and go get a job and provide for my family. Not realizing that, with nothing but a high school diploma, you get minimum wage mall jobs.
Right.
And I can remember that was back when the minimum wage went up to $5.25 an hour. And I'm supporting a family of 3 on $5 an hour. So
Wow.
needless to say, finances were always a huge issue in our marriage. The only saving grace for my wife in this, because again, I was emotionally inept and stunted, ignorant, whatever terms you want to put in there. Um, the saving grace for my wife then is she had the baby to connect with, and she could get her, emotions and her love and all of those things filled from the baby, because I wasn't able to do that until the baby turns about 2 years old and develops the no word and a little bit of independence. And so things got a little tense between Michelle and I. And so we decided to have another baby. And my middle son was born. And we washed, rinsed, repeated that cycle again. 2.5 years later, my third daughter was born, my third child, second daughter. That was the fall of 1997. At that point, again, we're still struggling financially. I got 5 people to take care of, still not making a lot of money. And I'm like, okay, let's kind of be done with the kid thing right now. And my wife agreed. She'd wanted to be done having babies before she was 30. So she got her tubes tied, and that was kind of the end of childbearing. But what that really did was it cut off all the coping strategies that we had managed for 6 years. And it brought all of our issues front and center.
Right.
And all of that came to a head on our 6th wedding anniversary, when my wife came to me and said, "That's it. I've had enough. I'm done. Get out." And so I moved out on our wedding anniversary in
Wow.
the spring of 1998. We went through full divorce, judge gavel bang. So by the fall of 1998, we were divorced. I moved back to Tulsa, trying to see the kids on the weekends, do the long distance dad thing. And it was just awful.
I'm sure.
Trying to
Yeah.
pick up the pieces of my life.
Right.
And I'd love to tell you that, through that, the Lord really got my attention, and I was praying and fasting and doing all the things to try to save my relationships. And I didn't do any of that. I was hurting so bad. I'd been hurt in the church many times, and uh, my faith was kind of in shambles in that season of life. And so I was just looking to do whatever I could to ease the pain and suffering and try to pick up my life and move forward. So kind of fast forward a few months, my middle son's birthday came around in the spring of 1999, and my wife was having a party, and so she invited me to meet them at the the place where they were doing the party, and got to enjoy spending some time with my oldest and my son. And after the party, she invited me back to her place to see the baby because the baby wasn't there. Now, our divorce wasn't particularly hostile, but we were not on good terms.
Right.
And for some reason, to this day, I still don't know the reason why, but in our divorce papers, they included protective orders, mutual protective orders. So I'm driving to her house realizing that now I am violating these protective orders, and there's a good chance that there'll be police waiting at her house, and I'm going to be in jail by the time the night's over. Right?
Oh,
That was
wow.
the status of our relationship.
Wow.
Uh, but nonetheless, I get there. No police were there. It was okay. We had a good visit, and a couple hours later, I noticed she's kind of hustling, bustling around to act like she's getting ready to go somewhere. I thought, okay, well, if you're leaving, I'll say my goodbyes and I'll head back to Tulsa, and that'll be it. She goes, well, I'm going to church tonight. Why don't you come with us? Okay, well, we were pretty sporadic churchgoers at that time. And I thought, okay, well, it's another hour with the kids. It's on the way. Can't hurt anything. Sure, I'll go. Uh, so we went to this little church. It was downtown Pentecostal Holiness Church in Shawnee, Oklahoma. And I'd never set foot in a Pentecostal Holiness Church. I didn't know. I'm a good Southern Baptist boy. I had no idea what to expect from that. But nonetheless, I wasn't going for the church service. I was going to be with my kids. So we go in. She finds a couple of her friends. They sit down on the pews, and it's our three kids. And then I sit at the far end of the pew, kind of deal. And the pastor gets up. The service goes off. I don't think too much of it. At the end of the service, they open an altar call. My wife's holding the baby, and all of a sudden she pushes the baby into my arms, and she takes off down to the front of the church. I'm like, okay, well, I was getting ready to sneak out the back because I still got a 2-hour drive, and I'm holding the baby, so I can't go anywhere. And who knows how long this Sunday night Pentecostal altar call is going to go, right? So the altar service wraps up, and my ex-wife comes sprinting down the aisles, tears streaming down her face. I'm holding the baby. She throws herself around me and says, I want to try to make this work again. And I'm like, who are
Wow.
you and what'd you do with my ex-wife? Right?
Wow.
This is
Yeah.
way out of character. We're like, what do we do? And so the pastor agreed to stay with us and talk to us a little bit after the service. Uh, so we go to his office and talk a little bit, and we lay out our story, and our story was ugly: lying, unfaithfulness, adultery, uh, you name it. We did it, and it was ugly. And I'll never forget, Pastor Ron looks me in the face, and he says, "You got a choice to make now. What is it you want?" And it didn't take much thought because I wanted my family back, and I was willing to do
Right.
whatever at that point. Um, and so we actually were reconciled and remarried exactly 1 year later on our 7th wedding anniversary.
Wow. Amazing.
So now, as I tell the story, I would love to say that, and we lived happily ever after, and God healed all the stuff. And no, unfortunately, He didn't. It was like He hit the reset button. He said, "Okay, you guys got so far off track. We're just going to have to pick you up, put you down here, and let's start over again." And so we thought that just meant, okay, if God was going to do this for me, um, that verse that talks about it's His kindness that leads us to repentance, like I did
Mm.
nothing to ask God to put my family back together, and He did it anyway. So I was like, I'm done playing. I'm in. No questions. Let's go.
I surrender. Yep.
And so yeah, we got involved in that church. We were just on fire for God and all the things. but like I said, God didn't miraculously heal any of our dysfunctions and any of our brokenness, right? He gave us another opportunity to work on them. And so we white knuckled that dude hard for a long time, for about 12 years. And
Wow.
then the wheels started falling off again. I was just ignorant. I didn't know what my own struggles were. I
Right.
had no framework for it. I had no community, had no friends, had nobody speaking into my life, any of those kind of things. And so um, when the wheels started falling off again in about 2010, 2011, we were at Believers Church at that time. And so we started meeting with some of the pastors, doing some inner healing work, really got excited about the Theophostic prayer ministry, and actually got trained in that. That was kind of our first foray into helping other people with struggles, and was finding some good relief to that. But there was just so much other stuff that was still getting in the way. So our pastors recommend we get into some counseling, and that's where we ended up at Plumline Ministries. Um, really having had this conversation, I remember very distinctly having this conversation with my wife at the time. Is like, look, we're headed for a second divorce. Um, we can give this Plumline thing a try, this counseling thing a try, and after a month or two, if it's no good, we'll just call it quits and be done. And that's how broken we were when we came in and started our own counseling journey.
Wow.
But some of the things that I learned about myself, and if my wife were here, she would tell you that she learned about herself, and the tools and the kind of total package of ways we addressed dysfunctions and brokenness and healing, and all of those things were just so life-giving to us that it completely transformed me and her. It saved our marriage, saved my relationship with my kids, uh, made me a decent human being to be around, right? Because I don't think I was before then. So we did our own counseling for about 3 years. Decided to get into the pastoral counseling training program that they offered there. Did the 4 years of training, and started pastoral counseling in 2016. So I've been doing this for almost 10 years. Uh, we ended up leaving Plumline not quite 3 years ago, so coming up on 3 years, and we started Reviving Hope Ministries, still with that desire to say, these were the things that changed my life. And I believe that they can change a whole lot more people's life. And I don't do counseling because I think I've arrived and I'm whole and healed and now I'm going to tell you how to do it. It's like, no, so many times the things that I say to my clients are for me. I've got to remind myself that these are practices and tools and things that help me be better.
Right.
And oh, by the way, if they help you too, that's great. we love that.
Right.
So really, uh, this has just been an ongoing personal journey for me for almost 13 years now. And I'm kind of on this mission to bring as many people along as we can, because I really think it is a message of hope. It is a message that brings life and gives people a framework to deal with anxiety, to deal with depression, to deal with identity. That's such a huge thing in our culture today. To learn how to manage emotions well, to be more aware of what's going on in their life, and bringing that dynamic into relationships as well.
Wow. That's an amazing story, Anthony. And I think the kind of the draw for me, even when I first heard your story, and I know for all our listeners, this is their first time hearing it, but I've actually heard your story before when I sat in on your class, was that you're not just, this is not just abstract for you. This is not just academic. This is not something that, you just sat in a class and learned from a textbook or something. You lived this. This was painfully working through the brokenness and the baggage and the issues. And so you are here, and by your own admission, you rightly say you haven't arrived yet. None of us have arrived yet, but we get to go on this journey through our brokenness and learn from it, as difficult as that seems. And so I love that you are in this place now where God is using your brokenness, using the lessons that you learned from that to now benefit his church, to now benefit his people. And so that's one thing I love about your stories. This is not abstract. This is deeply personal. So that's great. That's great.
Well, I think that's, I've been kind of pondering this over the last couple of weeks. Uh, there's a passage in Ephesians that Paul's writing to the Ephesians that's talking about the love of God, but it's that you can know this love that surpasses all knowledge,
Right.
right? Well, what is knowledge that surpasses knowledge? And I believe it's experience,
Mm,
right? I can know something up here.
right.
I can recite stories from a book, but when I sit down with a couple that's on the verge of a divorce and I tell you, I know what it's like to go
Mm,
through what you're going through
right.
because I've experienced it,
Yeah.
I have a knowledge that passes understanding, right?
Correct.
And that's how we connect with empathy. It's to say, I get it.
Right.
I've been there too. And that is the power of testimony. That's why we need everybody's testimony, because I haven't gone through what everybody else has gone through. I've only gone through what I've gone through. But
Right.
anybody that's going through what I've been through, I can connect to the same way
Right.
you can with people that have gone through things that you've gone through.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And so you come to this with a wealth of knowledge. The Lord has called you into this field. You actually did, while you are not like a certified, professional or anything like that. It's not that you're not just green. You're here with training. You actually studied all of this for over 4 years, and so your wealth of knowledge and wisdom is what I want to kind of pick on today. And so let's get right into the nuts and bolts of everything that we want to talk about. So, I think when we kind of think about the whole field of therapy and counseling and things like that, at least a lot of Christians maybe think in this way. Maybe there are some secular people who think in this way, but we kind of see it in terms of like two different categories. We see it as secular therapy and counseling, and Christian therapy and counseling. And I think there's probably some principles there that overlap, that are universal in many ways, but there are clearly also distinctions between the two categories. And so, tell me, Anthony, what in your mind, from your experience, from your knowledge and training, what are some of the distinctions? What are some of the differences between secular therapy and counseling and Christian therapy and counseling that really stand out to you, and why do those differences matter?
Well, I think as I understand it, and like I said, I'm not an expert in this field, but I can tell you how it makes sense to me. How it makes sense to me is understanding kind of the terms or the definition from where we're starting, of how we're created. Um, some people hold this model that, especially in circles of faith, that says, I am a spirit that has a soul that lives in a body. You can kind of think of an egg, the yolk, the white, and the shell. I tend to not really adhere to that model very closely. I like the other model that says, no, I am a body, I am a soul, and I am a spirit. I am a trinity, just like being created in God's image, because He's a trinity. Um, and what that allows then is the intersections. If I was able to draw this out and I put body, soul, and spirit, I drew a circle, and those circles kind of overlapped like a Venn diagram across those defining regions. What that actually then describes is on the end of the scale where our body is, there's physical access, right? That's how our brain, our chemistry, our body functions, all of those kind of things operate in the physical realm. In between body and soul, we have relational points of access because we're dealing with other people at that level. Between soul and spirit, we have an emotional access. Again, that's going to be both an internal and an external dynamic to that. And then on the end where our spirit resides, we're going to have the spiritual access. I think for secular, and I don't even really know that those are good terms to set in opposition to each other, but for the sake of argument, we'll stay with that. That secular, I think, deals primarily with the body, the body soul dynamic, the relations, and the soul to spirit, the emotional side. But it kind of stops there, and anything beyond that, we can get into some pretty
Nebulous territory, yeah.
strange teachings. Yeah, pretty nebulous stuff. Um, and the things that secular psychologists, sociologists, have found in those categories often have a lot of truth to them, right? So just because it came from the secular world doesn't mean that they're not right about how our body functions,
Right.
right? I don't need divine revelation to know that if I eat a bunch of junk food, then my blood sugar is going to go out of whack, or my blood pressure is
Right.
going to go out of whack.
Right.
Okay, those are universal truths. Same with there's relational, emotional truths that have been discovered through secular research, and a lot of it is very valid. What sets us apart, and there's a ditch on this side too, is because we want to bring in the spiritual aspect, because again, it's my belief that that is a third of the equation. We don't want to leave that out. So having a framework to talk about that in healthy ways then adds to the ability to address these concerns in a more holistic way. Now, the ditch that I'm referring to is in some, say, religious circles, some spiritual circles, we can over spiritualize things and tend to take things that are physical, relational, or emotional and claim them to be spiritual. And I
Sure.
don't think that serves us well at all.
Right.
But to say no, we have this uh, uh, way now of what's the word I'm looking for, to kind of describe a holistic uh, way of being. It's the way we're created. God created us to have all of these dynamics. To me, just is really the first kind of conceptual idea that really married the whole idea of being able to walk out our faith in a very real way.
Right. No, I think that's a very good distinction. I think that it really goes back to the question of a worldview, doesn't it? Like, what lens
Mhm.
are we looking at ourselves through? And a lot of times, I know you don't like the secular label, but just for practical purposes, for whatever from the secular side, there is this prevailing worldview that we're just matter, we're just molecules in motion, we're just atoms. And excuse me. And so there's just this idea that there's no real, what theologians would call teleology, right? There's no telos to who we are. There's no meaning or purpose. We're just here. And if we're just here, then we're just a bunch of molecules and neurochemistry. There's just some electricity running through all this flesh and blood, and that is a very inadequate view. And whereas that's a very like humanistic sort of view, whereas if you look at it from a Christian perspective, we have the concept of imago Dei, being made in the image of God. What does that mean? And I think even within the field of science, there are even today neurologists, who don't understand something like consciousness. We've been talking about consciousness for decades and decades now. You open up a person's brain, you're not going to find consciousness, but it is this mysterious thing that their worldview doesn't have a category for, and the Christian worldview does. So yeah, I agree. That's a fantastic distinction to make.
It's funny as I'm remembering an incident where I was actually talking to a college professor who's now the dean of that college a number of years ago. He was teaching a class that I was a part of, and we were having this conversation of, okay, where does it translate from, the electrical impulses, the chemical transfers, at this cellular, molecular level to consciousness? And his response, well, if you figure that out, there'll be a Nobel Prize in it for you. So
There you go.
we just
Exactly.
don't know.
Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Keep going. What else? What else stands out to you? So obviously there's that distinction. Anything else?
uh, that's the biggest one that I deal with. Um, we could talk about, you know, well, I don't know if we want to open this can of worms or not. I'll leave this up to you. But because there's such a different worldview, especially in hot topics that we deal with today between um, gender dysphoria, gender assignment, um, even just relational dynamics.
Right.
We've moved culturally away from what we would typically call a very conservative base from back in the 1940s and 50s, uh, through some of the modern revolutions of the 60s and 70s, to now we're kind of in this modernism, almost postmodernism kind of culture, um, that there's a lot of pressure uh, in the secular sciences to kind of conform to these things, that uh, for those of us that still hold those more conservative values, biblical worldviews, um, they're like, yeah, I don't know that that's actually serving us well. And so there is a little bit more divide now than there probably has been in the past, based just on like what you're talking about, the worldviews of kind of where you're uh, planting your flag at, if you will.
Right. And I think this is very, very indicative of, everything in the sort of the mental health sphere and the, therapy field and all that, because really, like you said, the worldview distinction dictates everything else, literally everything else. It dictates that. And, I remember listening to Richard Dawkins, very famous atheist.
Mhm.
He's still around, but he's not as famous now, I guess. But back in his heyday, he was kind of talking about, just the superiority of the scientific worldview, and how understanding, who we are as human beings and how we function, and the universe and all these things, cosmological things. And I remember thinking at that time, having this conversation with one of my philosophy professors, and he was saying, science seems to take this position that it has the answers to all of the most fundamental questions that humans ask. But if you actually if you read some of the great poets and the great philosophers, and you read even going back like to some of our scientific people like Galileo and Kepler and all these people, a lot of the questions that they were answering and or asking and dealing with were questions that fell into like the categories of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, right? So origin is, how did I get here? Meaning is, what am I here for? Morality is, how should I live? And destiny is like, what should I do with my life? What happens next? And what is interesting about those four categories are none of those are scientific categories. Like none of those
Mhm.
questions are scientific questions, they're all philosophical questions. And so the fact of the matter is that even approaching it from that particular worldview doesn't go far enough. I think scientism has this perspective that, oh, everything can fall under the umbrella that can be answered within a scientific worldview. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to the most fundamental questions that human beings are asking, scientism just doesn't have the bandwidth to even begin to address some of those questions.
No, I totally agree, and I think it is one of the things that is kind of an existential crisis in a lot of our culture today, is because we've moved away from embracing faith, embracing God as the source of creating this meaning, value, worthiness, destiny, all of those kind of things. We start trying to put other things in that place. And sometimes
Right.
we put it in relationships, sometimes we put it in jobs, sometimes we put it in status, sometimes we put it in performance. And none of those things are able to carry the weight of that kind of pressure. And again, that's why we see so many of these places really crumbling, uh, because they just weren't designed to carry that. We're trying to um, put our whole spiritual world, our faith world, our God into this other person or this outcome or this thing, and it's just not big enough to hold it.
Right. And even the field of like secular therapy, for example, it approaches everything like from, okay, like, no, human beings have a psychological problem, whereas we would say we have a spiritual problem. And secular therapy wants to say, well, your ultimate, your ultimate pursuit should be self-acceptance in a sense, because basically you have a wrong view of yourself, and we're going to try to correct that view of yourself. But then the Christian worldview would say, well, actually it's repentance. It's not self-acceptance, it's repentance. That is what is going to put you in good standing, maybe. And tell me if I'm being too reductionistic about that. Maybe there is some overlap there, maybe there is a little bit of self-acceptance that we need to consider. But that's kind of getting, I'm just trying to go a little deeper into the distinctions, even in terms of like authority,
Uh,
right? Like the secular worldview would say, well, your ultimate authority is your therapist. And well, the Christian worldview would say, well, it's actually scripture. I don't know. Maybe I'm making that too black and white, and maybe it's a little bit more gray. So just correct me if you think that's the case.
yeah, I think it is some of both, right? Because the way I teach it is, especially when we're talking about self-acceptance. Self-acceptance, what I'm trying to do in a healthy form of self-acceptance is find my identity
Right.
apart from my performance, right? And so I can accept that my performance is bad sometimes. I can be guilty of doing some awful things, but I can still accept myself. I can still love myself because I'm getting this identity from God.
Right.
And because God says that, no, we're good, but what you did, I don't like or was bad, then we can repent of the thing. And it's actually the acceptance that gives us the freedom to walk in the repentance,
Mm.
because I'm accepting my identity just as I am. This is a thing I did some research on, that in Matthew, there's a story that talks about where the scribes and Pharisees come to Jesus and they ask him, "What's the greatest commandment?" Right? And what's he say? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. That is the greatest commandment. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. Well, if you kind of break down those three phrases, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, that literally in my paraphrase anyway, can be how you are, who you are, and where you are today.
Mm,
Okay. So I get to love the Lord my God just the way that I am. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to have it all together. I don't have to be the finished product. I can bring all of me, the good, bad, the ugly, the broken, the
right.
deformed, and I can still say, I'm going to love God.
Right. No, I get what you're saying, and maybe I wasn't clear in the way I phrased it. I think what I meant when I said self-acceptance was that the secular worldview begins from a starting point that human beings are fundamentally good and occasionally do bad things. Whereas the Christian worldview would say, no, we're fundamentally bad and occasionally we're capable of doing good things. I think that's what I meant to say is this
Okay.
idea that no, there's nothing wrong with you. There's just a few things here and there, cognitive behavioral therapy can fix all that and you'll basically be good. But whereas I think this is what the point you're coming to is God ultimately is the one who informs us of our malady and tells us, no, son, you are fundamentally broken. You have fallen short of my glory, and you are not
Mm-hmm.
righteous just like the rest of the 8 billion people on this planet. And so, in that sense, acceptance is accepting that you are fallen and that you need me.
Right.
Would that be a better way to phrase it? Probably, I think I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I like that. Makes a lot of sense.
Right. That's fantastic. So let's go a little bit deeper, right? This is getting very, very interesting. Um, so Christians, and I'll say I've been guilty of this myself, we tend to view secular models of counseling and therapy and things like that, or just even psychology in general, we view it with a lot of skepticism. And maybe there is some warranty for the skepticism, but again, I don't like the idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And this is one of the things I really enjoyed sitting in your class was you didn't do that. You didn't throw away the entire field of psychology. You said, no, this is a great discipline. This is a great field of study that God has given us that human beings can learn from. And there's a lot of even Christian principles that you can find in this field. So I don't know. Maybe it's the legacy of Freud or Kinsey. I don't know, but it's just left a bad taste in the Christian mindset for secular psychology. Where do you think this kind of skepticism is coming from? And to counter that, what are some things that secular psychology actually gets right?
Hmm. Okay. Uh, so I think with uh, any number of stories of histories that gets passed down, um, the power of editing can be very strong. And I think we see that even in today's social media, right? We can take a soundbite of something and make it say basically whatever we want it to say.
Right.
And I think some of the more famous secular psychologists that kind of help form the science of psychology, um, yeah, they got a lot wrong, right? And some of that was cultural influence from the 1800s and the early 1900s,
Right.
and those things defined some of those belief systems or the interpretations, and so some of those were off. Now the principles still there were valid questions being wrestled with, valid issues and concerns being addressed and researched. Um, but yeah, they got some things wrong, and I think again, um, in this effort over the years to uh, our tendency to over spiritualize things, we did
Hmm.
throw the baby out with the bathwater in a lot of those cases. Say, oh well,
Right.
if they messed up in one area, it invalidates the whole thing.
Right.
No, it's just
That's
they
not
got that
helpful.
part wrong. Right. And so I think maybe there's some turning back to say, okay, well, there are some things that those psychologists got right, and we can learn from those things. Uh, Again, the beauty of what I get to do because of staying in this pastoral approach, we get to then say, how does that measure up to biblical teachings, and how can we incorporate what we know from the physical, the relational, the emotional dynamic, and add the nuance, the flavor, the kind of rest of the picture biblically. And that's what I like to do. So anytime I'm, listening or learning from a secular therapist or uh, uh, psychologist, that's always what I'm doing. I'm like, oh, that relates to this Bible story, and
Right.
this might actually approach those kind of things, uh,
Like a Jordan
and
Peterson,
that's
for
what's
example.
exciting for me. Sorry, say again.
Like a Jordan Peterson, for example.
Yeah,
There are some things that I hear him say, and I'm like, well, that's really Carl Jung. But then there's some other things he says that I'm like, oh yeah, that's very biblical. Yeah, I could see the justification for that.
right. Yeah. So again, I think anything that we do, because we are so complicated, we are such complex beings, anything that we do to really try to simplify doesn't serve us very well. But it means it's messy that we have to deal with this in the complexity of what it is. And it makes it really hard to kind of to find a principle uh, that works across lots of dynamics. Again, that's probably more a cultural thing, that in our Western culture we uh, assign more value to these principles, these rules, these truths, these things that are
Right.
universally applied. Whereas more in the Eastern world, they're like, no, we're okay with it being more nuanced and more complicated and more flexible. And
Right.
like, okay, well, maybe they've got a little better insight in this, because we just don't we're just not able to reduce it down to such simple terms.
Right. Yeah, no, it is very telling. I think, yeah, even the oh man, we don't even have time to get into the whole Western versus Eastern paradigm of looking at these things. That we'd be here another 3 hours if we tried to do that. But no, I think there is a like even looking at this through the wrong lens is what leads to a misdiagnosis of sin. For example, there is no category for that in the secular world, and so as we've seen in the last like decade or so, we've tried to, you see the secular world try to clinicalize something that we religious people have always been like, well, that's sin. I know what that is. It's not a mystery. But like for example, the last 15 years, suddenly there was all these medical journals that started talking about a crime gene, that maybe genetics can actually explain criminal tendencies. And then of course pedophilia, for example, they started calling it minor attractive syndrome and things like that. And again, this kind of goes back to one of the reasons I think that religious people, Christians for example, have been skeptical about the secular world, is because it is a sort of a bankrupt worldview. The explanatory scope of some of their conclusions that they come to is just not sufficient. And you know trying to give a reason for, oh, he's not bad, he's just sick. He's not evil, he needs therapy, there's something wrong in his head. And yeah, there is, in one sense, something might be wrong in his head, but it's because of sin. But again, yeah, speak to that a little bit about how maybe what are, in at least in terms of like, what are some practices that you think where the secular world in your training is not going quite as far, at least in like in terms of like practices, not in terms of like conceptually.
Uh, the thing that's coming to mind, and I don't know if this is going to address the topic head on, so if we need to shift, we'll try to. But um, again, I think this is a very much a cultural dynamic, a movement, a worldview
Mm,
that we don't allow ourselves the space to grieve very well,
mm,
for things to be sad. And so when we have no room for sadness, whether we believe it's weakness, depression, lack of uh, uh, motivation to make changes, any of those kind of things, our only other option then is to shift to blame, right? To
mm.
find the reason, to find a fault, to try to describe it in a way that we can fix it,
Right.
right? And but our Christian worldview gives us that avenue to say, no, we actually live in a fallen, broken world. And
Right.
there's some things that just aren't fixable.
Right.
And we have to grieve losses, we have to endure suffering, we have to engage in those discomforts. And I believe that's really the only healthy avenue there is to actually make changes
Mm.
in society and social cultures and all of those kind of things. Because as long as we're pointing the finger, let's take racism, or we could take politics, or we could take any of those things to say, no, it's your fault because X, Y, or Z, and they say, well, no, it's your fault because A, B, and C, and we're sitting there pointing fingers at everything, and nobody's being able to make any change to that. But
Right.
it's not until we have the humility to grieve the loss, to say, okay, wait a minute, we're broken here. I'm broken, you're broken, this is all broken. How about we work together to try to find something better? And I
Right.
think with this kind of more focus on the individual, um, we could call it navel gazing at a societal level, right?
Right.
That we lose sight that it's our ability to come together that's actually going to make real changes.
Right.
And until we have some kind of a construct for that, and to teach that and to exercise that and to work on those things, yeah, it doesn't look good because we're always going to be stuck blaming somebody. It's not
Right.
my fault, it's their fault, or maybe it is my fault, and so then I'm, you know, struggling with my identity. And okay, no, but we don't have to find the gene to say there's broken people,
Right.
and it's okay. I'm broken too. How about we work together to get less broken?
Right. Right. I don't know if you're familiar with. Have you heard of Abigail Schreier? Abigail
I'm not
Schreier,
familiar with that.
many years ago, back in, I think it was 2020, maybe 2021, she came out with a book called Irreversible Damage. And it was
Hmm.
about the whole, we were at the peak of the whole transgender movement and things like that. And she wrote a book condemning that, basically saying how, this is kind of this is a social contagion, and the practices, there's a sort of a an incentive structure that's built into the medical field to promote this, but it's not coming from a true place of medical science. It's coming from an ideological perspective. And there were a few places like Amazon actually initially banned the book. They didn't even put it
Hmm.
on their site. Barnes and Noble wouldn't, publish it, but put the book in their stores and things like that. But eventually, all of that changed. But she came out with another book a couple of years ago called Bad Therapy, and in the book, I think sometimes people read the title of the book and they jump to conclusions. Never judge a book by its cover, right? This is why we shouldn't do that. But in the book, she actually is pro therapy. She likes she thinks therapy is good, but I think her one thing that stood out to me in that book was her criticism of children's therapy. And that was one of the problems she had, is because children as young as like 10, 11, 12 years old were going to therapy, and these therapists were teaching them rumination, to just keep ruminating on your problems and issues. And this creates I don't know, you're the therapy guy, you know all the terms for it, but um, personalizing it, and identifying with their problem, instead of being able to separate and say, no, I am me and I have this problem, versus I am this problem. This problem is who I am. And she was talking about the bad practice of modern children's therapy, where they teach the children to keep processing, keep reliving their trauma over and over and over again, but not really giving them a off ramp, not really giving them some tools and resources to cope with that. And this is exactly what you're doing in your ministry. Is you're not anti-therapy. You're not saying no, we shouldn't process. No, you should process. It's good. Sometimes you need to go swim deep into those dark waters to find that thing that you've lost. But then you have to come back up again. And the way to come back up is through scripture, through the truth, through the gospel. And would you think that's kind of a general fair assessment of one of the problems with secular practices? Is maybe, like you said, you use the term navel gazing, right? Maybe there's too much navel gazing in secular therapy.
Well, and maybe it's a semantics thing, but to me, how I define processing would be the actual start to finish, right? Of being able to identify those struggles, maybe go into those dark places, but having the tools and structure to come back out with a story
Right.
that doesn't hold the emotional pain that it used to,
That's good.
right?
Yep.
So we're not dismissing our story, we're not rewriting our story, but we're not getting stuck in our story. And I think what
Right.
you're
There you
talking
go.
about, that I would describe as being stuck in your story, of just going to that place of hurt and stopping there. It's like, no, no, no. Who wants to do that? That's awful. let's
Right.
let's move through it, um, by being able to look at my identity in it, to be able to look at the emotional content of it, to be able to assign, the activity of all the parties that played in those things. And then what are the steps that we take, the very practical things that we do to continue to move forward with that. So at the end, I say it this way, we have a story that's actually more true than the story we started with.
Good.
Because the story we start with is generally going to be some kind of a conditioned response. It's going to be what the assimilation of those informations based on my old patterns and habits and thoughts and all of those kind of things. And the ability to move into that story, again, we're going to invite God to help us, with that, to work through those dynamics, to come out on the other side to say, oh, when I was telling the story before, I didn't realize there was this facet and this facet and this facet and this facet. So now I have a better picture, a better understanding of the complete complexity of all of those things. And now this story feels actually more true than this story does. And
Very
there's actually some
good.
cool science in this, looking at trauma. The way your brain stores information is really interesting, because we would think that if you had an event, say maybe as a child you were chased by a barking dog, okay, we would think that that whole memory gets stored together in one section of the brain. It doesn't. You have the actual event stored in one part. You have the emotions you felt stored in another part. You have the physical response you had in another part. And all these different layers get stored in different compartments of the brain.
Interesting.
And for a child, we need somebody, maybe a parent, maybe a teacher, maybe a mentor, to come help make sense of that story. So then our brain can then recoalesce all that information into one component. But if nobody ever helps us do that, and we've got these 5 different sections of storage, well, guess what's going to happen the next time I encounter just a nice dog? Oh, dogs are bad. Dogs are going to bite me. Dogs are going to chase me. I'm instantly, in this fight or flight mode.
It's a
Well,
trigger.
again,
Yeah.
secular science would say, well, that's PTSD, obviously, because you got chased by the dog as a child. Well, no, it's because nobody was there to tell you how to coalesce that story.
Mm.
So we actually have to then go back into that maybe painful, traumatic memory and figure out how to coalesce the story. So it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe that dog had a problem, or this was what was going on that day. And that doesn't mean that now all dogs are going to be this way. And now I have a more true version of that story. But that's what we're talking about is I do a lot of narrative therapy, story work of,
Mm.
what does this actually mean? Because our brain is just naturally wired to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. It's I like the word you used. You use narrative, and we all have narratives. We're constantly creating our own narratives in real time. Like I'm probably subconsciously creating a narrative right now of this podcast that we're
Absolutely.
doing. But just because it's in creation doesn't mean that it's forming correctly, right? And it's that's what you're saying is it could be interlooped and spliced up in different ways, and that gives you a more fragmented view of the actual reality. So it requires going back and correcting, like putting together the broken pieces of glass so you can actually see a full image and not a fragmented image.
Yeah, I love that word description there, because that's really what we're doing. And um, there was a little clip, a video clip I watched not too long ago. I think it was from Mel Robbins, and she's kind of rose to popularity here in the last 6 months or so, talking about different therapeutic models and whatnot. And one of the things that she was talking about in this interview is that most of us never develop our emotional capacity more than about the level of an 8-year-old.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And so most of us are interpreting the world emotionally as 8-year-olds. Well, what 8-year-old is going to interpret in a healthy way?
Right.
Zero. Right. So that's where we have to, and I think this is what true freedom actually looks like, is the power to go back and evaluate our story.
Right.
Right? If I have no freedom to reevaluate, then I am in bondage to that story.
Right.
But if I have the freedom to go back, to work through these things, to say, okay, well, my 8-year-old self believed that. What does my 50-year-old self want to believe?
Right.
Right? What's more true about it now? And and that's where the freedom comes.
Right. No, that's really good. One other thing I like that you said in your class was you made this distinction between emotions and feelings. And that was the first time I'd heard that even when you said that. Could you explain that to our listeners, and so just so we get a framework for how to, write our narrative, if you will.
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's a semantic detail that I like to point out, and in most conversations we can use feelings and emotions pretty interchangeably. But when we do this kind of work where we need to be a little more intentional about identifying these things, I like to make the distinction like this. I say feelings are what I experience internally. That's what goes on inside of me, are my feelings. My emotions are what I express externally. It's what I emote. That's why we even have that word for that. Now, when my inside and outside are in alignment, my emotions are going to match my feelings. But there's also a lot of times where there's dissonance between my emotions and my feelings.
That's right.
You say, well, what
That's
does
right.
that look like? Well, that means I can feel very happy and start crying. I'm emoting sadness, but I'm feeling happy. Or sometimes I can feel bad, like I've messed up, guilt in a healthy way, but I can emote anger.
Right.
We say things like, I'm mad at myself. Well, no, I'm just, I don't know how to process that feeling of guilt that
Right.
feels overwhelming. And so my coping strategy comes, well, if I just get mad enough, then I can do something about it.
Right.
Right. So we can have those dissonances, and it's important to recognize so that we're telling the story appropriately. Right. Mad generally is what we're going to consider an appropriate response when somebody does something hurtful to me, does something sinful towards me, that actually offends me in a legitimate way. Right. Well, there's nothing wrong with anger.
Right.
If we lose self-control, that's a different story. But the emotion of anger is just another emotion. The the power in anger is that it often will mask. It's a protector emotion. It will give us that sense of power to take action that allows us not to have to deal with the more vulnerable hurt, the disappointment, the frustration, the sadness, whatever it is. So that's where we get some of the confusion, is that we think we have to be mad about something to make change. We've even given it terms like this righteous indignation kind of
Right.
term. It's like, no, I think sadness is just as powerful an emotion motivationally as anger is. But again,
Right.
we've misdefined it. We've kind of given it this stigma about it that we have to avoid sadness at all costs. Well, that's
Right.
just another emotion.
No, I think that's very well said. And even as you were talking, it reminded me of this really good movie called Inside Out. It's a cartoon.
Oh, I love that
It's a
movie. Yeah.
really, really good movie, and it describes exactly that, because the main emotion, joy, in that movie is constantly trying to protect the child from getting sad. But what that ends up doing is she actually becomes numb, and then finally she allows sadness to kind of take over, and that restores balance back to everything. So that's exactly right. But what you're saying is also biblical. I like this distinction between feelings and emotions, because we men struggle with this a lot. I know I've struggled with this in the past, where I feel insecure, I feel um overwhelmed, but I emote anger, or I emote impatience or annoyance. And there's the dissonance that you're talking about. It doesn't always, your emotion doesn't always accurately reflect your feelings. And I think this is also where scripture is very clear about this. It says, be angry, but do not sin. Right? It's God is allowing us to say, hey, no, you can have your emotions. There's nothing wrong with that. I gave you your, sorry, not emotions. I gave you your feelings, but don't emote in a way that causes sin, right?
Yeah, we don't ever want to uh, be in a place where we become so dysregulated then that we are hurting other people. We're damaging relationally. Now, does
Right.
it happen? For sure, and it's going to, uh, but we have the avenue to repent and reconcile and rebuild those things. But I think that's the warning there. It's not avoid anger. It's saying no. You get to have any feeling you want to have,
Right.
but they're still yours to manage. You don't get to just run over people and do all kinds of nasty stuff to others
That's exactly
because
right.
you feel that way.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Well, Anthony,
And I'll
as
just
we
say
kind of,
this.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll just put maybe a cliffhanger teaser on the end of this, because if you'd have known me 10 years ago, I'd have been one of the most shut down emotional persons that you would have ever met. I I thought emotions were evil, feelings were horrible, they're of the devil. Uh, right, the more spiritual are, the less emotional you are.
Mm,
I had all these kind of messed up things, but in this journey, I've come full circle, if you will,
mm,
because I now believe that our feelings and even our emotions are our gift from God that help us be more like Him.
mm,
And I think
right.
that's another distinction between secular and Christian, at least my version of Christian theology, is that, you know, even in a lot of religious circles, we tend to shame emotions and say, no, emotions are evil. You know,
Right.
you shouldn't go by your feelings. Right? All those things can't be trusted. Like, well, no, God is an emotional being. Right? You
Yes.
cannot read the scriptures and not understand God has emotions.
That's right.
And because we're made in His image, He gave us emotions to be more like Him, so that we can
Right.
see things like He does, so we can feel things like He does, that we can have the empathy and care for others that He does, and the care for ourselves that He wants us to have, that's appropriate. So emotions and feelings are not things to be shut down, run from, suppressed, but we have to understand their role and how to manage them and not let them manage us.
Very good. Very good. That's great, Anthony. And as we kind of come to the end here and wrap things up, I want you to give our listeners some practical tools and tips on how to discern between healthy and unhealthy models of thinking. Obviously, we talked about the importance of having like a more holistic anthropology, understanding what does it mean to be human, who are we as human beings, and that's where it should start. It should start from what it means to be made in the image of God. But what are some practical tools that you would leave that you would give people in order to manage all these things well and have a correct perception of reality?
Uh, Gosh, again, we could do 5 or 6 hours on this one, but
Yeah, that's a very loaded
I'm going to
question. I
try to
apologize.
put it
Yeah.
in a minute or two. The thing that's
No, take your
coming to
time.
mind that I think would be part of the foundation is we can't do this alone. We were never meant to do this alone.
Right.
But who we get to partner with and ask to journey with us along this path is very important. And we have to use a lot of wisdom and discernment to help figure that out. And so there's a book that's been out for a while. It's from Cloud and Townsend, the guys that did the Boundaries series. It's called Safe People.
Mm,
And so I would say probably your number one priority in starting this journey is to find safe people to
mm,
help you with it. And even some therapists are not always safe. So just because they
right.
have, a plaque on the wall doesn't make them safe. Because what I define a safe person to be is somebody that's going to hold space for you.
Mm,
It's not going to try to influence you. That's not going to try to live your life for you. That's not going to try to give you directions and insights of what you should and shouldn't do. Those are not safe people. And that means that it may not be some family members. It may not be some coworkers. It may not be some people you thought might be safe.
Right.
If anybody's trying to give you those kind of directives, those kind of inputs of, well, this is what I'd do if I were you, or this is what you ought to do, or those are not safe people. A safe person is going to come around you and say, how can I help you be the person you want to be?
Mm.
And find that safe place. Now, is there going to be struggle? Yeah. That doesn't make somebody unsafe. But that's the thing that's really coming to mind, is if you're going to start this journey towards healing, wholeness, being who you want to be, you're going to need safe people in your life that will hold you accountable, that will love you, that will hold space for you, that are not going to try to be directive and tell you how you ought to live your life.
Very good. Okay, and thank you for the plug for that book. I'll make sure to put a link for that book. Is the book out yet, or is it coming out?
The Safe People book?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's been out for a long time. It's
okay.
an older book.
Oh, it's an older book. Okay, great. I'll put the link, maybe the Amazon link for that book, in the show notes so our listeners can access it. Anthony, where can people find more information about you and the work you do and things like that?
Probably the easiest way is through my website. It's reviving-hope.com. The hyphen's very important. So reviving-hope.com. There it talks about some of the classes and workshops that I do throughout the year. Those are always open to the public, so you can check on there to find out when the next classes are going to be, as well as some general contact information, my email, phone number. You can all find on the website there if you have any questions, or want to look into seeing if meeting on one-to-one sessions would be applicable to you. So
Right. Okay, fantastic. Wonderful. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's been really wonderful. I really enjoyed kind of picking your mind about all these things, and I really, I'm confident that our listeners would have gained some good insights and understanding into this. And I appreciate you being a good steward of what God has called you to do.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It's been enjoyable, and yeah, I hope there's been some nuggets for folks to take away from this.
All right, folks. Well, that's it for this episode of the Reasonable Truth Podcast, and we'll see you again on our next show.